Hello. Hi. Oh, thank you so much for that introduction, Carly. Thank you for Grace and Erica and the entire team to put this event together. It is truly a pleasure to be here and to speak with you about leadership and to share the lessons that I get to learn every day from coaching my amazing clients and from my podcast where I get to speak to female founders and bring their lessons alive. So I've got some slides for you today. I'm going to go ahead and here we go. That's not it. Give me 1 second. I like to joke that this is a whole other skill to learn, which is Zoom or Bevy piloting. Okay, let me try that one more time. Aha, cool, got it. Thank you for bearing with me. And let's make sure we're presenting. Okay. Can you all see that? I hope so. Thumbs up. Anyone from Grace, just to make sure? Yes, thank you. Okay, so here are my top 3 takeaways for empowering female leaders. And this is why I'm here. I'm here because I believe that it is up to us to build the world of tomorrow and that we need to build good things. And that how we do that is that the world of tomorrow is being built by the entrepreneurs of today. And that we desperately need those entrepreneurs to be women and to be diverse. And I learned this early on, I would say almost a decade ago when I was working at Google. And a woman came in named Wendy, and she was the CMO of Pepsi at the time. And she came in and it helped me realize that not only is women in leadership at that time, and still sometimes a dire numbers game, that there are not enough of us, but also that that's where it starts with us, with where we are today, with you watching this, no matter what stage of your leadership journey you are on. I also learned in those early days at Google that, if you look at Google, started by 2 kids in a garage, which ended up becoming such an influential impact on the world, the culture of Google, influencing other tech companies, other ways that we manage and lead teams, and even politics and national dialogue. I thought it was really exciting that all started from 2 kids in a garage, just maybe like where you are today. So that's why I've dedicated my practice to helping female founders who are in that stage of building from the ground up. Now, I mentioned that I learned a little bit about the leadership situation with women at Google, and that's where I'd like to start a conversation, because in order to understand how to lead in today's world, I think we have to understand it a little bit better. So let me share with you some numbers. First, did you know that there are more CEOs named Mike than women CEOs? And this comes from the S&P 500, okay? And what that equates to is that less than 3% of CEOs of the world's largest companies are actually women. So that's a very, very small number. It's been getting better because we've been doing a lot of work, but that's still the case today. And it's actually hurts my brain, because if you look at the performance, and this is amazing research that's come out, companies with 30% or more women executives outperform their competition. They outperform companies with fewer women in the executive team. We know that as a fact, right? We also know that women-led funds, and these are hedge funds, outperform their male counterparts by up to 3x in dollars, okay? And then this one, I hope you've heard this, that women-founded companies, this is in the startup world, this is our world, outperform their male counterparts by 2x when you look at dollar invested. That's from BCG research. And the last one here, they're more likely to exit 1 year faster than their male counterparts. So I want us just to take a moment to let this all sink in. I hope that we've seen these numbers before, but this is an immense snapshot of what's going on when women are involved at founding companies, and leading them. And make no mistake, this isn't just about diversity. We know that diverse teams perform better. But this is about the impact of women being in those leadership roles, right? This is, I like to think, the female effect, okay? And this is my favorite quote from Jennifer Neuendorfer. who's a founding partner at January VC, simply that we're going to invest in an underlooked asset class that is overperforming. I think that says it all. And now let's continue the story. Okay, so we know women perform better, but we also know that less than 4% of venture funding goes to women-founded startups, and that number actually dipped in 2020. Now, what I don't think about when I see this number is the other side of that coin, which is that 96% of all the money that VCs deployed in 2020, which is about $125 billion, actually went to men. And it was deployed probably by men, because if you look at the investment side of that, at least the venture side, only 12% of decision makers at VC firms are women, 2.4% of founding partners are female, and 65% still of venture firms still have 0 female partners. Again, this is getting better. We are moving the needle, but I'd really like for us to just paint the picture here for a moment, because again, when we look at leading from this space, it's got nuance and it's got a difference to it, right? And there is a magic that comes from leading as a woman. And this all kind of goes together to paint a picture that for me is about this reality that the world that we live in was built by men investing. So it's those men making investment decisions to empower and to fuel up ideas that other men have that then get turned into bigger ideas and creates more wealth and gets funneled back into investing into more men. So what does this mean? Well, I like to take a piece of teaching from Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And what he says is that sometimes we have these ideas and they're just being rained down on us from the moment that we are schooled and become socialized. And it's been raining down on us for so long that we don't even know that we're wet. And I think that that's actually what's happening right now. And we are waking up to the fact that so many of these male-dominated practices, ways of conducting business, negotiating, ways of running business, ways of building culture at companies were built by men. And so when we look at empowering female leaders, I think one thing we have to realize is that we are wet with the rain of all these male influences. So that's the stage I'd like to set before we go into the top 3 takeaways for you, because they're all going to be about coming out and through as an authentic female leader and finding what that means in your daily actions, because you kind of have to start putting an umbrella over yourself first and realizing that you don't have to be wet. Okay, so let's get into it. Here are my top 3 takeaways. And I'm going to do this in a little bit of storytelling fashion because we know that stories stick a little bit longer in our brains. So the first takeaway I'm going to illustrate to you by talking about how I learned it. So recently, we were interviewing women for our podcast called Straighten Your Crown, and about negotiation. And negotiation is one of my favorite topics. It's, I think, the art form of human interaction. So I'm fascinated. I studied psychology in school, and I think that everything in life is a negotiation. From a conversation like who's talking next and how long do I talk for, to negotiating the stairs or buying a cup of coffee. And I've studied negotiation for a long time. I've studied it through courses in college. I've studied it at Google, getting trained by Stuart Diamond, who wrote the book Getting More, which is known to be a textbook of negotiation. And I've also, studied it from Chris Voss, who's one of my favorite former FBI negotiators. And it wasn't until I was conducting these interviews for my podcast that I realized that everything that I've been taught about negotiation, I was being taught by men. Now, that has its benefits because oftentimes we are negotiating with men, but it never covered something that I found to be very confusing. And now I'm going to oust myself for a moment. Even though I've studied negotiation for so long and I teach it, right? I was actually really bad at it. And I mean that from, whether I was at a Turkish bazaar buying spices or negotiating with Verizon Media, right, for my cable bill, or negotiating a project for my work and my practice. At the end of the day, even though I knew all the negotiation techniques from BATNA to trading things of unequal value, to referring to an external standard, to making emotional payments, right? Even though I knew all these techniques, I wasn't at the end of the day, actually closing the deals that I had envisioned in the beginning. And why is this? Well, it was from talking to these two women that I found out why. This is Erin Gleason Alvarez, who's a trained lawyer and the CEO and founder of Take Charge Negotiations. And this is actually my dear friend Natisha, who is trained as an instructor at Harvard Law on negotiation. And what they helped me realize was that in these negotiations, at the end of the day, there is a thing that women feel, which is, I feel bad. Now, as I'm saying this, I wonder how it's hitting you and if this resonates with you, that in those tense conversations, whether it's a fundraising conversation or you are giving feedback to your co-founder or an investor or somebody who works for you, somebody on your team, that there are moments that we keep ourselves from saying what we need to say and asking for what we really want because there is a feeling and I feel bad. And I love this because the insight here is that even though our prefrontal cortex is operating at full RAM, right? We're able to think through problem solving, we're able to articulate. At the end of the day, there's a feeling in our bodies that is the I feel bad feeling. And this holds us back. It holds us back in negotiation and it holds us back as leaders. And this is the other insight, right? As I started to talk to Natisha and Erin, is that at the end of the day, what we don't realize is that we're not responsible for other people's emotions. Okay. And as a leader, that doesn't mean that you don't care, right? I think a foundation of leadership is simply to care. But it does mean that we can advance our mission, our vision, and live our values without taking too much responsibility for how other people feel, because they're responsible for how they feel. So the first takeaway that I want to give you, these women leaders, is simply don't feel so bad. Again, that does mean to care, but simply, what if you didn't feel bad when it came for asking for what you want and charging forward with what you believe in, especially under the reign of practices or habits that may just be adopted, right, as a matter of living in a world that was built by men investing. Now, I know that this is probably easier said than done, so let me help you a little bit with how to not feel bad. So the first thing, this again comes from Erin, just this simple statement to say to yourself, almost like a mantra, right? Their behavior is not my fault. Because Erin told us about many times where she would enter rooms and be negotiating against a white man or white men, and there would be unconscious bias on that side, and there would, or maybe not so unconscious bias, but they would see a woman come in the room and have all these associations fire off and perhaps behave in a certain way. And so what we can do as leaders in that moment and negotiators in that moment is say to ourselves, their behavior is not my fault. And the second thing that we can do is, I hope you didn't hear that. That was my Siri popping up for a moment there. The next thing we can do is we can learn how to feel the bad feelings, the discomfort, but to act, to do, to say actually what we believe in. Is simply to be uncomfortable, simply to be with that somatic experience of feeling bad, and even practice that, right? Practice feeling, but still following through with what we want and what we need and what we are hoping to lead right into the world. And then the third thing is just simply to reflect, because how many of us have agreed to something in a negotiation or not said something, silenced ourselves in a situation or a conversation, and then thought about it afterwards. And for me personally, I know that that feels much worse, knowing that I either silenced myself or I went along with something that wasn't exactly right for me. So just keeping this in mind, that and when you are in that moment, that it's not your job to take responsibility for the other person's emotions, that feeling bad is not the end of the world, and that there's something more important to you probably than just not feeling bad in that moment, and that if you don't do it, you might actually feel worse later. So that's my first takeaway. I'm going to build on that as we go into the second one, because I hope you can see that when we are, again, women operating in this world that was built by men investing, it's likely that there are going to be habits, conversational patterns, behaviors that might make us feel bad, right? So the next part of this, right, is thinking about who is in charge. Who is actually in charge of how you work, how you show up, and the norms and the cultures that you create at your company? And hopefully the answer there is you. But oftentimes I find that we don't consciously think about this all the time. I see this again with my clients and all the work that I get to do is we forget. And what we do sometimes, and what the brain does, it tries to conserve energy, right? It's a very smart organ, is it runs off of older habits and patterns. And those older habits and patterns actually think that we're a lot younger than we are. And so oftentimes we end up showing up to our companies or to our work the way that we showed up to homework or to school when we were kids. So it's a great thing to update yourself and just simply ask who's in charge and to reiterate your position in that as the leader of how you work and how you build your company and how you treat your team. And part of this, especially for the female leaders that I love to empower, is a check-in with the self of what do I want and need. And I want to ask you that right now in this moment, just to simply take a check. What do I want and need right now or today? And I'm super curious, and maybe you can tell me in the chat, I'm super curious about if this question feels new to you, to really ask yourself what you want and need, or if it feels familiar. And if it feels familiar, that's fantastic. And if it feels new, that's also fantastic because I think it's a huge opportunity. And maybe as well, you can start asking this question in the we form. What do we, my company, my co-founder and I, right, my stakeholders and I, my team and I, what do we want and need? Because again, the older habits of young women who are socialized through a world built by men investing is to be more invisible, to not stick the neck out, otherwise fear of being called bossy or assertive, right? And to be well behaved. And that, again, not our fault. It's just the rain. Okay. So this is a way to actually get in touch with a little bit more authenticity and to listen in deeply, because guess what? The leadership that you're looking for comes from inside. So what do you want? What do we want and need? And now let me take this a bit further. Then using that to take up space. And if you think about what a leader is, I think the simplest, the crispest definition that I've come across is that a leader is simply someone others follow. And when we can source inside to understand our why, what we want and need, and what's best for our company and our vision, and then take up space with that, that is the place where our vision meets other people's receiving. And this is something that I like to say to all the female founders or women listening right now is when I talk about, the world of tomorrow being built by the entrepreneurs or the women of today, what I really do mean is that it's for you to take up space. Because when you do take up space and become leaders, we saw from earlier that the performance of your company 2-3x better than the competition. Okay. So this is takeaway number 2. Is design for you. Design for you. And I mean this in like an innovation way. I mean this from take a look at the way you schedule your meetings or run your calendar. What if your meetings didn't have to be 30 minutes or 1 hour? What if they could be 28 minutes or 16? I have two female founders that I had the pleasure to work with who realized that energetically, the best way to design their workflows was based on their hormonal cycles. So the week in, week out of how their bodies responded, how much energy they had, which weeks of the month were best for engaging with investors or sales calls versus which weeks were best for doing internal work and maybe just putting your head down and executing. I say that, and every time I've said that, it's caused a little bit of like a whoa with listeners because it seems so abstract. But again, that is what I mean in terms of the rain down on us. Because what if the world had been built from the outside by women? Would this have been just a way that we ran our businesses? Now, that might be a little bit of an outsized example for you, but let me bring it a little bit more real, right? I remember when the Wing opened up in New York City. It was, for me, one of the first co-working spaces designed from the ground up for women by women. And there was an article that I remembered reading about the temperature of the office, that the temperature of the Wing was a little bit higher than other office spaces. And a light bulb went off in my head, because at every single office space I've ever worked in, I've always been cold. And there has been research that although there is no skin temperature difference between men and women, there is a preference for women to have a higher office temperature. And in fact, they are more productive. And so I just want to point out these seemingly invisible things that we live with, but that we don't have to. Because if you truly were going to design for you and how you work, how you lead, what you need to best operate, to be at your optimal creativity, effectiveness, and leadership potential, what would that mean? How would you run your meetings? How would you speak to your team? Where would you have those meetings, right? You can actually ask this question about everything, okay? And this is one of my favorite ideas. This comes from a woman named Glennon Doyle, who wrote Untamed, and I've adapted it. And my saying is, a woman becomes a leader when she stops being an obedient daughter. Just gonna let that sink in for a moment. Because again, just habitually, our brains are running a lot of subconscious processes that get us to see the world in a very specific way. And one of our earliest identities was probably that of a daughter, at least, or at least a child. So when we think about leadership, we think about what it means to step out of that identity and into our adult leader identity. And that starts with honoring, building an environment that works for us, right? Building cultures that influence other cultures, building the next Google, for example, and creating a company that goes along with that. I hope this is like an inciting idea for you. And an example of this just came out. Toronto e-commerce company Nixwear raises $53 million after the CEO, who was pregnant with twins at the time of fundraising, nixes involvement of any investor who questioned her pregnancy. I kissed the ground when I saw this. It is an act of pure courage and an incredible thing that she raised such an incredible round, and exactly what I mean, that you do get to set the terms. And you can negotiate along the way, right? Depends on how much traction you have and how confident you feel. But at the end of the day, this is a decision that we make internally, okay? Now let's keep going. I'm gonna bring us, kind of keep building here into our third takeaway, which starts with this. Once we figure out what we need and the companies that we believe in building, because if you look at the way that companies have been built up until now, we have burnout is basically an epidemic, okay? Let's not do that, right? So once we realize what we need, what our people need, what our company needs, what our product needs, it's time to voice it. It's time to actually talk about it. It's time to actually make requests. And it's time to start to negotiate those outcomes in creating that environment with anybody that we work with. I'd like to point you to this video. I'm not going to play it now just because of the bandwidth, but I'm going to talk you through it, because this I found to be a very powerful example of how we can bring voice to the things that we want and need and how we run our companies and our conversations. So this is a conversation with Jeff Weiner when he was the CEO of LinkedIn. And when he tells his interviewer was, someone just wrote me an email the other day and they were angry about something. And he said, and I knee-jerked and I was frustrated, if not outright angry, that they were expressing themselves like that. And then I took a moment before I responded. I thought to myself, I wonder why they're so emotional about this and what we can do about it. And I ended up getting on the phone with them and I said, hey, are you trying to solve a problem or are you just trying to vent? So I want to point this out here. We're hearing a conversation where someone, this leader, is actually taking into account how someone is talking to him, how an emotion is being expressed at him. And he's putting up an awareness, right? He's voicing something and in asking this question, really pointing out, hey, is this okay behavior? And I know from just, again, coaching my clients that we all are in situations like this every day where somebody has gotten upset at us, or in the situation with the Knicks CEO, where an investor's questioned her pregnancy, right? What does it look like when we know what we want or need, right? To start to voice that. So that's what this is going to show you. So he says, are you trying to solve a problem, or are you just trying to vent? So pointing it out, right? And in response, the person who got angry in the email said, so I'd like to solve this problem, but I think it's too late. And as a result, I'm very angry. And Jeff replies back, it's never too late. Let's focus on solving the problem. And then after that, let's come back to how you expressed yourself. I think it can be done differently. I love this example because it's tactical, it's real, it engages with the person speaking. And he says it's not about blame. It's not about shutting down because somebody has become angry with you. It's not about thinking, hey, I've done something wrong. It's about being curious and voicing and then creating a conversation that works for you, which is, we got to talk about how you express yourself because that's not how I do business. And we can do it differently. And as I'm saying this, I hope you are gaining a little bit of curiosity, or maybe some ideas are firing as to how you can start to create these cultural norms or ways of doing business for you as a leader, because like I said, we need it. So this is takeaway number 3, is to use what you have learned about yourself as a leader. My Siri is still popping up, excuse me. And to make requests, to actually voice what you want and need. And now let me take a little bit of a dive in, okay? Because I know that this doesn't always come automatically for women. Linda Babcock, she was the dean of, I forget which university right now, wrote a book called Women Don't Ask, because what she found was that year after year, the graduate students who were teaching courses at the university were men. And she found this to be very strange, because it was a very prestigious thing to be able to teach a course at the university as a graduate student, even though there were plenty of female graduate students. So she went to the dean of that department, which happened to be her husband, and asked, why are you being a biased jerk? Why are you only letting men teach these courses and giving them these opportunities? In reply, he said, I'm not being biased. I'm giving it to them because they're asking. The men are showing up at my office to ask for this opportunity. And so Linda got a lot more curious, and she started to think, why aren't the women asking? So she went to go talk to the graduate students who were women, and she's asked them, hey, how come you didn't ask for this opportunity? And in reply, the women said, we didn't know that that was the process. If we had received an email to tell us that we should go ask, we would do it, but we just didn't think to ask. And this is something that I like to have it sit with you for a moment, of how many things could be changed or could be present in your business or in your life if you simply actually asked, right? If you overcame this, if you started to voice the things that you want and need. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to ask, right? Because asking sometimes can feel a little bit uncomfortable. It can feel bad, right? Asking to change the temperature of a room, asking to not have meetings after 5:30 p.m. or between 5:30 and 7, because that's when, my kids go to bed, right? And so here's let's go dive into this a little bit. The number one reason people don't ask is they think they'll be unprepared for the response they'll hear. And this is the same for when we ask for promotions, we ask for more money, we ask for more time, we ask for more information when we're being asked to do something. Anything where we're negotiating, and please do negotiate, right? So what do? How can you get better? How can I equip you to get better at asking? Here are some tips. Give yourself the mindset that the win for you is simply making the ask. It's not even the result. Just voicing what you want and need is a win for you. And it creates, hopefully, a conversation. And it can even create, as in the case of Jeff Weiner, right, with the person who got angry with him, it can even create a better business relationship, because now you're a little bit closer on how you treat one another, how you speak to one another, right? So simply asking is the win. Number 2, if we're so unprepared for what we think we might hear, well, we can prepare for that. We can actually get our brain into the mode of being able to come up with responses, being able to deal with uncertainty. And how we do that is we make a list of 15 things that we think they might say in response to our ask, and then every response that we might have to it after. And what this does is it trains the brain to start to think about responses, to think on its feet, and to think about a multitude of situations, so that when the moment, no matter what they say, you can not only feel prepared, but feel capable. Third, asking is a muscle. Verbalizing the stuff is a muscle. So start small. You can even ask someone if they'd be willing to, get you a cup of coffee, or take a 5-minute break between meetings because you need to go to the bathroom. Okay. And fourth, this works really well for women, because what we know about women is that they negotiate as well as men at the negotiating table when they ask for others, when they negotiate on behalf of others. So think about who you're asking for, and if it feels like it's still something for you, is it really just for you? Or is doing this for you as the CEO, the leader of your company, or somebody who works at a company, how does that impact the teams that you work with or that work for you? How does that impact your customers or the people that you serve, if you can actually do something for you? Okay. All right. So if you've been to some of my talks, I like to make it real. This isn't just a life. This isn't just a dress rehearsal. This is our life, right? This is our company. So if you're serious about leveling up your leadership, this is something I'm going to invite you to do. And please feel free to tell me in the chat what it is. What's one thing that you can ask for today that's going to help you lead better, show up more authentically, right? To actually take up more space, to build the company that you believe should exist into the world, to build the norm, the cultural norm that you believe should exist in the world. What's one thing you can ask for today? I'd love to hear them. And I'd like to leave you with some closing thoughts, right? Our responsibility as leaders is to create an exciting but safe adventure for our people, worthy of them devoting their lives to it. And the only way that we can do that is to tap in and to really start to express what we believe to be right in the world. And the other part of this, again, just thinking about the rain down on us, right, is there's so many ceilings that women have yet to break. And I love this quote, this idea from Serena Williams, which is, when she was little, right, girls from Compton don't play tennis. They own it. So how can you make this space that we live in more your own? How can we make it more equitable? How can we experience more female leadership? Because it's so good for the bottom line and for everyone. Because what you're working on right now could be the next Google that ends up influencing millions of people, not billions. And this, right, being different, is part of the story of every successful woman, just by virtue that there are so few women at the top. 3%, remember, right? A willingness to be different, to be ourselves, is critical. Listen to your own opinion. It is with that I'd like to say thank you for listening to my ideas. I hope that they help you level up your leadership. I recently gave a workshop on confidence, because that is the thing that, again, helps you start to act and to lead in these ways. So I'm going to share a link with Grace where you can get this guide that I wrote for you. And this is how you can keep in touch. For the podcast, we have 2 of our negotiation episodes currently out. We have 3 more coming. And I really hope that they help you dispel some of the, again, rain that we've been experiencing as women when it comes to negotiating and getting what we want. And with that, I'd love to open it up for questions.
Awesome. What a great way to start this event. Thank you so much, Amy, as always. I think we have time for maybe just one question, which I want you to leave us with, which is kind of switching gears, is what is your advice to men to be allies to women in the business and startup space? What can men be doing to either make room or, combat some of these issues that you're talking about?
Thank you for asking that. I assume it was a man who asked that. Thank you for doing that. Number one is to keep doing that, is ask the women around you, how can I be your ally? What's going on? Number two is when you see a woman who is being talked over or interrupted, jump in and advocate for her and say, hey, I think, Grace wasn't done speaking, right? And then educate yourself, acknowledge all of these biases against women, acknowledge your own, and start to see the bias in just the world around us and start to question. That's the goal for all of us, right? And then when you as a man are in a leadership position, like, I know a lot of male founders that I coach are actively looking to include women in their C-suite, right? But and that might be, hiring, right? Startups, we know that's a thing. But even before you get that woman in your C-suite, see if you can ask a woman to mentor you, and she could work for you, and she could be somebody on your team who is, maybe an individual contributor for now, but mentor you on the, how do I make this place more inclusive for women? How do I elevate women leaders? What are you experiencing that's actually a little bit difficult for you? Because it's not your fault if you don't know that mothers, right, need evening time with their kids. I didn't know that before my friends became parents. So just start asking and start to include those perspectives more and more. That's what I would say.
Amazing. And one more, how do you combine the not feeling bad with being empathetic? What's the balance there?
I love this question. I have a one-word answer for you. It's compassion. And what I mean by that is empathy is feeling with somebody, right? I'll give you this example. When you go to a doctor, you actually want them to be compassionate, not empathetic. Because if you go to the doctor and you've broken your arm, and what they give you is empathy, what the doctor will do is, oh, yes, you broke your arm. My arm hurts too. Okay? That's not what you want. What you want is compassion, which is, wow, I can see why that would be such a difficult thing for you. I can see your pain. I honor that that's suffering and that feels bad. And here's what we're going to do about it. Here's how we're going to alleviate that suffering. Here's what we're like, it's direction, right? It's a wish for that suffering to cease. So I say be a compassionate leader, be empathetic in being able to take other people's perspectives and to sit in their experience. But at the end of the day, when we're leading, I believe a lot in compassion.
Well, that is a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much, Amy. As always, you're such and so inspirational. So we hope to have you back soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.